Mr. President, on behalf of the New Birth of Freedom Council and the Susquehanna Trail District, it's a pleasure to welcome you to the Susquehanna Camporee here, and we're commemorating the 150th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg. Before you see the assembled army of the Susquehanna gathered here in peace. We have rebel and Yankee units, but they've gathered in friendship to hear whatever remarks you care to make, sir.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Looking out on these troops, I feel safer already. Thank you very much. It is a real pleasure to be with you Pennsylvania folks this afternoon. You see, I have a warm spot in my heart for Pennsylvania. I have deep roots in Pennsylvania. Now, my people who were Quakers came over to this country from England way back in the 1630s, and they settled up in Hingham, Massachusetts. One thing about the Lincolns, boy, they sure did move a lot. They moved probably for the same reason that many of your parents moved, for a new job or a better job, maybe more productive land. So they come moseyed on down into New Jersey, and then my great-great-grandfather, Mordecai Lincoln, he was an iron worker. He left New Jersey and settled in Pennsylvania along the Schuylkill River. Wound up settling in a little town called Birdsboro, PA, outside of Reading. Anybody here ever been to Birdsboro? Well, I'll tell you, my great-grandfather Mordecai, they told me that he built a house in 1730 in Birdsboro that's still standing, right next to the Boone family. The Boones and the Lincolns were neighbors. As a matter of fact, my great-great-grandfather Mordecai is buried in a Quaker graveyard with some of the Boones right outside of Birdsboro. Now, to continue my Pennsylvania connection, Mordecai had a son, John Lincoln. And John married a Pennsylvania gal from Lancaster, Rebecca Flowers. And they had a son, Abraham, my grandfather. And that's who I was named after. And he was born in Pennsylvania. So you can see I have deep roots in Pennsylvania. But I also have a love of Pennsylvania. Just as a matter of fact, I could not have received the Republican nomination for president as a presidential candidate in 1860 if it hadn't have been for Pennsylvania. You see, in the first ballot on the nomination in Chicago, you needed 233 votes to receive the nomination. After the first ballot, William Seward of New York had about 173. I had a little over 100. Simon Cameron of Pennsylvania, favorite son from Pennsylvania, had a little over 50. And Edwin Bates and Simon Chase had 49 and 48, so they couldn't have enough votes. In the second ballot, Simon Cameron pushed his Pennsylvania delegation into my column, which started the momentum rolling, and I was nominated on the third ballot. Now, in appreciation, I put these very talented gentlemen into my cabinet. And for Secretary of War, Simon Cameron of Pennsylvania. And then about a year later, I made him minister to Russia and had a long-time Pittsburgh resident, Edwin Stanton, come in and take his place as Secretary of War. So you can see here again, Pennsylvania playing a key role. And also, we could not have brought the war to a successful conclusion without Pennsylvania's efforts on all levels of government. In the Senate, David Wilmot of Towanda. He was a big help to me in the Senate. He of the Wilmot Proviso that said that slavery could not have any gains in the lands that we got as a result of the Mexican War. Also in the House of Representatives from Lancaster, Thaddeus Stevens, the great commoner. He had a very key role in the Civil War. You see, he was chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee. So after Fort Sumter was attacked in Charleston Harbor in South Carolina, and the insurgents opened fire and the Civil War began, I called out the militia, asked for 70, 90,000, 75,000 men, but I didn't have any money to pay them. So, Thaddeus Stevens, in record time, as chairman of the House Ways and Committee, introduced the bill, put it in the committee, got it out of committee, got it voted on the floor and passed, so by the end of April I had money to pay them. Very key point in bringing the Civil War to a successful conclusion. And of course, locally, Governor of Pennsylvania, Andrew Gregg Curtin. He was a man of foresight and tact. He kept the militia together. Now, when I called out those 75,000 troops, I wanted them to protect Washington because we were surrounded. The first troops to enter were Pennsylvania troops, the so-called first defenders. I knew then that the insurgents could knock, but they weren't getting in. In addition, Governor Curtin established a military camp right outside of Harrisburg. It was later called Camp Curtin. It was the largest Union training facility in the North. In fact, it was the largest training facility north or south. Some 300,000 soldiers had passed through Camp Curtin, thanks to Governor Curtin. And also made sure, you know, Harrisburg was the railroad center. So all of the men, all of the ammunition, all of the supplies came out of Harrisburg on railroad cars to the eastern front, or out of Harrisburg on railroad cars to the western front, over to Altoona, over the Allegheny Mountains. So you can see, Pennsylvania played a key role in men and supplies. Thank you. These are newfangled things for me. So, you know, that's the other thing. Pennsylvania civilians paid the price. Do you know that Pennsylvania supplied over 320,000 soldiers, more than any other state except New York? Yeah. And the civilians in towns paid the price. Who knows it better than Pennsylvania? Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, was invaded 3 times by the Confederate forces. In fact, in 1864, Jew Worley had the town almost burnt to the ground because Pennsylvania refused, Chambersburg refused to pay the $500,000 ransom requested. York, Pennsylvania, the most northern town occupied by Confederate forces. And right up the road here, Wrightsville, Jenkins troops, Confederate troops wanted to catch that bridge. Civilian, almost military trained civilians, man picked up a musket and helped defend that bridge. Actually burned that bridge so they couldn't get across to Harrisburg. His goal was to go to Harrisburg or then swing east to Philadelphia. Thanks to the Wrightsville people, that didn't happen. Hanover, the Battle of Hanover. Old Stuart was pushed east to York. Therefore, he didn't arrive at the Gettysburg battlefield until the night of the second day. Could have been a turning point in the war. And of course, it was Governor Curtin that arranged to have that purchase those battlefield lands and have a dedication of the cemetery at Gettysburg. And of course, he asked me if I would make a few appropriate remarks. And standing out in this hot sun, I think in closing, I would be remiss if I didn't share with you the remarks I made on the 19th of November, 1863, at the dedication of the cemetery at Gettysburg. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now, we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for all those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate We cannot consecrate. We cannot hallow this ground. The brave men living and dead who struggled here have consecrated it, far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is for us rather to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to the cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, and that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. With your permission, I'll ask the troops to pass in review. Army of the Susquehanna, and hut, right face, pass in review.